In the last 24 hours, the Israeli Air Force once again carried out strikes on our enemies far from home. This time, the targets were in Yemen, 2,350 kilometers from Israel. 10 aircrafts dropped 30 munitions on Houthi targets in operation, ringing bells following Tuesday's ballistic missile attacks on Israel by the Houthis, together with multiple drone attacks. The Israeli strikes targeted Houthi weapons and fuel depots alongside the rebels' military camps. Back home in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a stark threat to Qatar, telling their leaders, "If you do not expel terrorists and bring them to justice, we will do it." Regional fallout from the Israeli strike on Hamas leaders in Doha, Qatar on Tuesday also continued, with the United Arab Emirates banning Israel from exhibiting in the prestigious security conference in November. However, Israel is forging ahead, and that also means continuing to strike Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Additional high-rise buildings in Gaza City were struck and also demolished this week, while the IDF Chief of Staff declared that we are advancing towards the collapse of Hamas. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host, Yair Pinto, and this is the weekend edition where we bring you all the truth about what's happening in Israel. This is also including some stories that fell between the cracks during this week. And once again, after a missile from Yemen was again intercepted on Tuesday and following the Houthis' increased launches of UAVs towards Israel, Israeli Air Force fighter jets struck back on Wednesday evening in Operation Ringing Bells. The targets of this operation were Houthi weapons and fuel depots alongside the rebels' military camps at 2,350 kilometers away from Israel. This was the longest combat mission that the Air Force has completed since the beginning of this war. According to the Houthis and their Ministry of Health, there were 35 fatalities from these strikes, with at least 131 others that were wounded. At the same time, the IDF was continued its wide strike on terror infrastructure in the areas of Gaza City in the Gaza Strip. The Air Force has so far completed 3 waves of strikes based on precise intelligence, during which more than 360 terror targets were attacked by dozens of aircrafts. This is being done to soften up the Hamas positions for a ground incursion, which will commence very soon. In anticipation of this, Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group are trying to prevent residents from leaving the city after the sweeping evacuation order issued by the IDF, and are otherwise preparing for battles in that location. Despite threats of punishment and violence, about 150,000 residents of Gaza City have left so far. Meanwhile, assessments of the failure of the strike in Doha, Qatar, are growing more solid, and it was partially due to the decision to minimize collateral damage. However, the strike in Doha was not only intended to eliminate terrorists and terrorist leaders, it was intended to eliminate the sense of immunity that terrorist leaders were having in other countries like Qatar and Turkey, and we'll tell you more about that very soon. However, sources assess that the elimination of the Hamas top echelon in Doha, Qatar, failed, as reports in the Arab media and in Iran claimed that the leaders went out to pray in the nearby room, leaving their phones, which Israel used to target them, behind. In Israel, they emphasized that there is no certainty about the result, and the strike was aimed at pinpoint damage to avoid harming innocent Qatari bystanders. Finally, a new report in the Israeli Ministry of Diaspora Affairs details and also reveals that the Flotilla, led by the extremist activist Greta Thunberg, is a humanitarian cover for activity initiated by Hamas and by the Muslim Brotherhood, whose purpose is to launder the narrative of this terrorist organization and to defame Israel. We'll bring you a closer look at this fascinating story, including the prominent activist public connection with senior figures in the terrorist organization. So we have a lot to talk about today. Let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground weekend edition, reporting on what's happening in Israel and on what slipped by us this week. and this is day 706 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are operating under the orders of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we begin, I want to call on you to continue spreading the truth. Behind the strategy of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, there is a war over the minds of people and the public's opinion all over the world. And the enemy is spreading lies. Here, at Boots on the Ground, we're fighting back, and we need your help. So leave a comment, hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the donate button, whatever you can to help us spread the truth of what's happening in Israel. This morning, as we were getting ready to drive to the northern border with Lebanon, we heard the shocking news that Charlie Kirk was shot. He was murdered in a university campus in the United States. I still cannot comprehend that this happened. While he was debating students, a sniper shot him from 300 meters, hit him, and he fell at the spot. He was fighting the good fight of sharing the truth, fighting for his principles, for biblical values. I think that now, more than ever, we need to unite in prayer for the truth, for his family, and we need to stand up for what he stood up for. And that's sharing the biblical values and our morals. We need to share the truth and stand up for what Charlie stood for. And now we are starting with the news from Yemen. On Wednesday evening, Israel's Air Force struck a series of Houthi targets in the Yemeni capital of Sana'a and various other sites. The Ministry of Health of the Houthi rebels reported 35 fatalities from the strike, as well as another 131 wounded. This was the longest combat flight that the IDF has carried out during this war, traveling over 2,350 kilometers before launching their weapons. Several aerial refuelings were carried out in the course of this strike. And according to the El Arabiya media portal, 6 targets were struck, including the headquarters of the Yemeni Minister of Defense, located in the center of the capital. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu referred to the strike and said, "A few days ago, we eliminated most members of the Houthi terrorist organization in response to the launch towards the Ramon airport in the southern part of Israel. This did not weaken our hand. We struck them again today from the air, and their terror initiations at terror bases with very many terrorists, and also at other facilities, and we will continue and strike whoever strikes us, whoever attacks us, we will reach him." The IDF further notes that the headquarters of the Houthi military and its information department that was bombed disseminated incitement and propaganda messages in the media in Yemen, including speeches by the leader Abdel el-Malik and statements by the spokesperson Yahya Sari. The military camps that were struck are used by the Houthis to plan and carry out terrorist outlets against the IDF forces and the State of Israel. In addition, the military camps included operations and intelligence war rooms that are used by this regime. And earlier this week, a UAV launched by the Houthis succeeded in penetrating Israeli territory and striking the terminal of Ramon Airport, causing some light wounds and damage. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development vis-a-vis the Houthis in Yemen. But before we move on with the news about other fronts in this war, I want to talk to you about some very special people who are fighting their own personal battles every single day. As Israel nears almost 2 years of war, our brave and battered Holocaust survivors are suffering like never before. These men and women endured history's darkest chapter, and now, in their final years, many face poverty, loneliness, and fear. 1 in 3 survivors in Israel lives in poverty. Many are over 90 years old, struggling with serious medical needs. Since October 7th, most say that their quality of life has collapsed. They sit in cold, empty apartments, often without safe rooms, as sirens wail around Israel. Meir Panim is a lifeline. Every day, 2,200 survivors receive hot meals and deliveries. Hundreds are cared for in our centers where they celebrate the holidays like a family. So this Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, with your help, Meir Panim will deliver 30,000 holiday pantry boxes, 25,000 meals and care packages, and 2 million shekels in grocery cards so survivors of the Holocaust can shop with dignity. Together, we can bring them warmth, nourishment, and the sweetness of a new year. So please, go now to bless-israel.org and bless Israel's survivors today. Again, that's bless-israel.org. And now before we move on to what is happening in the Gaza Strip, Boots on the Ground has new information and developments from the attempted elimination of senior figures of the Hamas terrorist organization in Doha, Qatar. And it is important that people remember we are talking about a terrorist organization. So 1 second before we continue, give a click to the subscribe button so that you remain tuned to the truth of what's happening in Israel, Boots on the Ground style. Sources familiar with the matter estimate that the elimination of Hamas's top echelon in Doha, Qatar, may not have succeeded because the senior officials were in another part of the facility when the bombs hit. This is consistent with reports in Iran, according to which members of the negotiating teams left their phones in the room where the bombs hit, going out to pray in a nearby room, which saved them from the strike. Another factor in this result was Israel's desire to avoid broad collateral damage. The strike was carried out in a pinpoint manner, without destroying the entire structure, with the intention of minimizing the harm to uninvolved persons, and in particular, local Qatari civilians. However, it should be emphasized that no detail is final, and there is no clear knowledge regarding the results of the operation at this time. For their part, Hamas has publicly rejected claims that its senior leadership has been annihilated in this attack, but they have offered no proof, such as the public appearances of men who are targeted. Extensive damage was done to the villa, and the entire area is being sealed off by the Qatari security forces at this time. Reports in Arab media portals are mixed, with some echoing the Hamas claims, but also offering no proof, while others admit that some Hamas leaders may have been wounded. And meanwhile, Hamas has publicly admitted that the son of one of the senior Hamas leaders, Khalil al-Khaya, was amongst the fatalities from this strike. Moreover, there are reports in Arab and in Iranian media portals indicating that the leaders left their phones in one room and moved to a different room for the afternoon prayers just moments before the bombs hit the room where their phones were. This tracks with the known Israeli practice of targeting enemy agents by tracking the location of their cell phones. However, many in the Arab media are openly questioning why these Hamas leaders do not prove to everyone that they're still alive by just appearing in public. There is also a question about why the stories surrounding their alleged escape from the strike keep changing. Several different versions of events, including many that contradict each other, have been publicly spoken in the last 48 hours. What do you think about all of this? Let me know in the comment section. And meanwhile, the leader of the United Arab Emirates, Mohammed bin Zayed, arrived in Qatar at noon on Wednesday for a kind of solidarity visit after this strike, and later, Jordan's Crown Prince Hussein is also expected to arrive in Doha, Qatar, and tomorrow, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman will land there as well. Furthermore, Qatar announced the suspension of its role as mediator in the negotiations between Israel and Hamas following the strike in Doha, and senior political sources estimated that Egypt's role in the mediation effort will grow. These sources also confirm that, from Israel's perspective, it is preferable that Egypt be the central mediator in the negotiations and the release of the hostages, since it takes a more balanced position towards Hamas than Qatar. A senior security source added that the strike in Qatar came to shake up Hamas's leadership abroad after it had effectively rejected President Trump's proposal and no longer served the negotiations, which had reached a dead end. He also assessed that the leadership of Hamas's military wing in the Gaza Strip, headed by Az el-Din el-Haddad and his deputy, Raed Saad, will not murder the Israeli hostages that it holds in response to the Israeli strike in Doha for pragmatic considerations, since they constitute its insurance policy for survival for Hamas in Gaza. According to the senior security source's assessment, if it turns out that indeed in the strike, all the Hamas senior leaders who participated in a meeting at Khalil al-Haya's house were eliminated, Hamas's Shura Council, numbering several dozen members, will quickly choose a new leadership for the movement and a team to conduct the negotiations on the release of the hostages and the end of the war in the Gaza Strip. According to him, at Hamas's top levels in Qatar and Turkey, there still remain several senior leaders who know how to communicate directly with the leadership of the military wing in the Gaza Strip that holds the Israeli hostages. Hamas indeed made Qatar one of the states identified with it in the recent years, and especially after the war started. But according to one of the advisors of the slain Hamas leader, Ismail Haniyeh, who was quoted by the BBC, the organization's people moved their activity from Tehran recently. About 1,000 Hamas members and their families now live in Doha, Qatar, in houses provided to them by the government of Qatar. The organization's senior leaders received villas of their own, and released prisoners and security teams were granted apartments in Qatar. With all of that in mind, Israel has sent Hamas a strong message with these strikes, whether they succeeded in eliminating their targets or not. There are no more sanctuary cities for terror. The strike was not intended only to eliminate individual terrorists, as important as that may be, but it was intended to eliminate the sense of immunity, to show that even if you sit in Qatar, surrounded by mediators and an atmosphere of security, Israel can reach you. Beyond that, the targets of this strike have been some of the most stubborn in refusing to be flexible in the negotiations over the release of the hostages and ending this war. And so, there is a message to these others that it will be wise to accept the agreements. On that subject, whoever thinks that this action will harm the negotiations should keep this in mind. Hamas's external leadership is not a pragmatic actor. Whoever lives a life of luxury in Doha, Qatar, with assets worth billions, has no interest in ending the war quickly and releasing the hostages. He does not feel the IDF sword on his neck like his subordinates do in tunnels running in Khan Yunis and Gaza City. But here an interesting paradox arises. Israel has already claimed it eliminated the Hamas men who were sustained ones, and Hamas claimed that only minor figures were eliminated. But this raises a fascinating question. Was this an operational failure or not? Let me know what you think. But the answer is not necessary. It seems that the planned failure itself was part of the message, to demonstrate power without blowing up the negotiations completely. Furthermore, the strike in Qatar sends a message beyond Hamas as well, because Iran's leadership as well as Hezbollah also received a clear notice. No place is safe, not even under the auspices of American allies. This is part of the long playing field policy that Israel developed, a capability to reach anywhere at any time. But there is something deeper here. For many long years, an unwritten rule operated in the Middle East that Israel does not act militarily in Gulf states that have relations with it or with the United States. The strike in Doha shows that Israel is prepared to break these rules and signals that it sees its national security as a supreme matter which overrides diplomatic considerations or the interests of other countries. And furthermore, Qatar has been playing a double game for many years, pretending to be an ally of the United States, but also supporting many of America's enemies, including Hamas. So maybe it's time for Washington to wake up to this reality as well. But speaking of a reality, we need to invest much more to bring people all the truth in order to expose them to what's really happening in Israel. And we need your help. So if you want to help us, you can share our videos, you can leave a comment, you can hit the like button, and hit the subscribe button so that you never miss another episode of boots on the ground. Now, I have a comment to make on what we've just seen happening in our region. Earlier this week, United States President Donald Trump posted a last warning to Hamas that they better release the remaining Israeli hostages, or else he will tell the Israelis to do whatever we need in order to try and end this war, and until Israel is satisfied with the results. A last warning means next time a blow will come. Israel is not a mad bomber going around blasting away at everyone that it doesn't like without coordinating moves with the American president. And with this strike in Doha, Israel followed through on President Trump's threat from earlier in the week. In other words, the elimination was not intended to defeat Hamas militarily. It was intended to manage the situation and everyone's expectations. In other words, this is a negotiation tactic as well as an operational tactic. There are many aspects to these negotiations, and most of them are never going to be revealed to the public. But I suspect that what we've seen happen should not in any way be viewed as a failure, whether the intended target survived or not. The more important thing is that a message was sent and almost as certainly was received by all the countries in the Middle East. Furthermore, the suspension of Qatari mediation may be temporary, but it transfers the ball to other areas, especially Egypt, Jordan, or perhaps more directly, American mediation. This could be exactly what Israel and President Trump wanted, to take the negotiations from the place where Hamas felt comfortable and move them to an area where there is less room for maneuver. Seen in this light, it is apparent that the strike in Doha, Qatar, was not the end of the regime and this game. It was a change of the rules. In this context, it is worth remembering the words of Golda Meir, Israel's prime minister during the Yom Kippur War of 1973. She said, "If we have to choose between being dead and pitied and being alive with a bad image, we prefer to be alive and take the bad image." I think I can speak from the overwhelming majority of Israelis when I say that this statement is even more relevant today than it was back then. And now, we will stay on the subject of the battle against Hamas, but move to another arena in this battle, the Gaza Strip. The IDF, with all the surrounding noise and the intensified fighting beyond enemy lines, is increasing the pressure on Gaza City. The goals of the strike is twofold: to motivate the residents of the Gaza Strip to leave the city while also acting to strip Hamas of its capabilities. According to the IDF, 3 waves of strikes were completed on Wednesday, and more than 360 targets were attacked as part of the next stage of Operation Gideon's Chariots B. The Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, clarified about the day after the strike on Hamas's top echelon in Doha that we are advancing towards the next stages in the mission of toppling Hamas's rule. This is our goal. His words were said only a few hours after another strike on high-rises in the city of Gaza. And according to the IDF, already last Friday, the IDF began striking high-rise buildings that were converted to military infrastructure, including cameras, observation war rooms, sniper and anti-tank firing positions, and command and control compounds. So far, several high-rise buildings that constituted a direct threat to the IDF forces were struck in a focused manner. The goal is to prevent Hamas from having the ability to control the elevated observation and fire over the maneuvering spaces. Several tunnel shafts have also been found and demolished in preparations for the main offensive effort. And following Tuesday's unusual evacuation order for about 1 million residents and displaced persons who are still living in Gaza City, Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group are broadcasting messages of entrenchment and steadfastness against the evacuation. The 2 organizations are concentrating forces and are in a military coordination in preparation for battles that are expected to be significant, perhaps the toughest since the beginning of this war. And meanwhile, the IDF spokesperson in Arabic, Colonel Avichai Aderi, published another evacuation warning to the residents in the Gaza port area and the south of the El Rimal neighborhood and announced that the IDF will soon strike Tiba Tower and the tents adjacent to it due to the presence of Hamas terror infrastructure inside it or near it. Aderi wrote in his message, "For your safety, you are obligated to evacuate the building immediately and move south towards the humanitarian area in El Mawasi area in Khan Yunis." Afterwards, the tower, located in western Gaza, was struck. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to spread the truth, so share and follow us. And most importantly, do not forget to click that subscribe button so that you remain tuned to what's happening in Israel and know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And once again, we're keeping our focus on the battle against Hamas, but switching to yet another front in this battle, as the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs and the fight against anti-Semitism published a report this week about the global Shamud Flotilla currently making its way towards the Gaza Strip. Highlighted by the participation of the Swedish activist Greta Thunberg, the report says that this flotilla is actually being organized by Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. The report determines that the flotilla is not an innocent civilian aid move, but a cover for propaganda activity and international legitimacy for terror through the use of the language of human rights while completely ignoring the events of October 7 and the crimes committed by Hamas. In practice, the presentation of the activity as humanitarian is intended to launder the narrative of terrorist organizations while exerting pressure on ports, shipping companies, and foreign governments. Finally, it is evident that the cargo is presented outwardly as an aid operation, but in practice, it constitutes a coordinated international move that grants legitimacy and awareness to the terrorist organizations. And according to the report, this is a decentralized structure based on three main axes. The first, creating a humanitarian appearance that includes a desire to bring in activists and diverse medical equipment, but in practice, to serve as a front for terror. It should be emphasized that over the years in Israel, activists of the various flotillas were offered to transfer the humanitarian aid that they carried, which was always small in its scope, to the Gaza Strip, to the Israeli port of Ashdod, but the activists constantly refused this offer. The second axis is the civil-public axis, the March to Gaza movement and the BDS organizations that operate elements on the ground, students, and also local action cells in more than 100 points of protest around the world with the aim of creating continuous public noise and exerting pressure on ports and on shipping companies while normalizing a pro-Hamas presence. The third layer is the Palestinian International Access organizations such as Global March to Gaza and the Freedom Flotilla Coalition cautiously and deliberately coordinate dates, narratives, and propaganda channels on social media. Thus, the effort was shifted from the land march towards Gaza, the Shamud convoy, which was blocked in June by the Egyptian authorities, back to a maritime flotilla. These organizations are responsible, amongst other things, for the infamous Mavi Marmara flotilla in 2010 and maritime direct and indirect ties with additional terrorist organizations, including the Popular Front and the Turkish IHH. At the same time, there is also the religious aspect. The Algerian initiative to support Palestine and aid Gaza and the Association of Muslim Clerics provide ideological framing and normative backing with historical and moderate ties to the Muslim Brotherhood and deep ties to the Hamas terrorists. These clerics serve as kind of a religious certification for the terrorist activity of the organizations against Israel. One of the prominent clerics in this field is Yahya Sari, who serves as the chairman of the Algerian initiative and is considered one of the central figures who initiated and led the Samud convoy that was blocked in Egypt. The Minister of Diaspora Affairs and the fight against anti-Semitism, Amichai Shikli, stated that the report proves that beyond the humanitarian guise operates a mechanism intended to serve the goals of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, part of a comprehensive campaign for delegitimization against the State of Israel. This phenomena feed global anti-Semitism and provide a tailwind to terrorist organizations, Our ministry will continue to lead the fight against delegitimization, to fight anti-Semitism, and to stand at the front of this fight against terror in every arena and in every international forum. I call on the international community to act on this matter. Today, it is Israel's problem, and later, it will be all of yours. So to give you a quick update, the Shamud Flotilla set off from Barcelona in late August and is now in Tunisia, the last stop before the Gaza Strip after being delayed due to various problems. I can't conclude today's report without noting that today is the 21st anniversary of the Al-Qaeda terrorist attacks on the United States of America, known to history simply as 9/11. Everyone who was alive on that day remembers where they were and what they were doing when they got the news. And here in Israel, we also remember that we were right in the middle of the second intifada at that time. And although we mourn the victims in America, the terror attacks here in Israel didn't stop. And many of our enemies in Hamas and other terrorist groups cheered the attacks in New York, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania. That hasn't changed. These enemies of Israel are still cheering whenever whatever terrible happens in America or any other Western country. That's what they do. They hate Israel, but they also hate America and the West. Their fight against us is just meant to be a warm-up for their bigger fight against you. So if we lose this fight, it will come to your front doors very quickly. So, with that in mind, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report and bring you all the truth about what's happening in Israel and the Middle East. Follow, share, leave a comment, and most importantly, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, guys. When you pray, make it personal. Pray for the IDF soldiers. Pray for all the leaders that need to make tough decisions to make the wise ones. And keep praying for the people on the ground and for God's will to be done, as it is in heaven, on earth. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.